Welcome to the Washington State Wire's election coverage, featuring candidates from this year's election season. Now, the host of our virtual conversation, DJ Wilson, publisher of the Washington State Wire.
Welcome to another debate of ours here in the 2020 election season. Really honored that you've made time to be with us this evening and that you are making time to be with us if you're watching this at the Washington State Wire website, where we're hosting this debate live, of course, rather taped on our site. And in addition to the debate we hosted 2 weeks ago with candidates in the 10th congressional campaign. It's primary season, a few weeks ahead of the August 4th election, and we're very honored that we have candidates for the office of Lieutenant Governor here with us tonight. Before I introduce them, I want to talk a little bit about some ground rules and some formatting as we put this event together. As many of you may know, we have a number of candidates running for the Lieutenant Governor position this year. It's an open seat, which normally doesn't happen too often in Washington State. It was open 4 years ago, but it had been over 2 decades before it had been open prior to that. The candidates, of which I think there are quite a few, we took the candidates who had performed best on fundraising totals. Not that fundraising makes a candidate, but it certainly is one demonstration that shows the hard work and effort that a campaign and a candidate is putting into the race. So when we looked at the campaign fundraising totals, it was clear to us that there were really 3 candidates that had differentiated themselves in terms of putting forth strong fundraising numbers to start during this election season. Those candidates included Denny Heck, Marko Liias, and Ann Davison Sattler. We invited all 3 of them to participate and recognize that it's often very difficult in a campaign season to find time, and also very difficult when people have day jobs like being an attorney, a state senator, or a member of Congress. So we did what we could to try to be as accommodating to all of the candidates as possible, including scheduling this during an in-district work session for Congress. Ultimately, both Marko Liias and Ann Davison Sattler were able to join us, and we're really honored that they both are able to be here with us. So tonight, we'll have opportunity for both candidates to provide opening and closing comments. We'll have a set of 11 questions that we've scripted and reviewed for fairness, but also with an eye to allow the candidates to differentiate themselves. The Lieutenant Governor seat is a subtle one. It's ministerial in a lot of its duties, but has an outsized role in the informal things it can do to help shape our politics and policies in Washington State. And so we wanted to ask specific questions that allow these candidates to speak to their records and their vision for the office. That really gets to impart the role of what is scripted for the Lieutenant Governor, but also allows them to speak to their more informal vision, or rather the vision that they might bring to the office that might go beyond the more ministerial duties of the role of Lieutenant Governor. So without further ado, one other point I want to make before we move into introducing the candidates and jumping into opening comments. We have scripted the role and the order of the questions tonight. We've done that in a way to try to maximize this ability to differentiate, but also to ensure with the greatest degree possible fairness and equal amount of time for our candidates. However, we don't want to be too scripted. So if at some point one of the candidates wants to jump in and have a follow-up, we want to try to accommodate that with as much discretion as we can. We'll try to subtract that time, however, from future opportunities to speak. So jumping in and answering a question that is not otherwise scripted by one of the candidates would result in us pulling time later in the conversation. So they're aware of those ground rules, and we're all trying to make sure everyone has as much opportunity in terms of equal time and vision and a platform to share their vision as possible. So without further ado, I want to jump right in. We have 2 great candidates, as I said, State Senator Marko Liias, who represents the 21st Legislative District in Snohomish County, and Ann Davison Sattler, an attorney who is a Republican. Marko is, of course, a Democrat. And based on the fundraising performance, we wanted to invite the candidate with the highest amount of funds raised to date to provide the first opening comment. The other candidate will provide the first closing comment. What that means is, to start things off this evening, Mr. Liias, let me turn to you for 120 seconds for opening comments. Welcome.
Well, thank you, DJ. Thank you to the Washington State Wire and to TVW for featuring this conversation. I'm Marko Liias, a lifelong Washingtonian, state senator and college professor, and I'm running to be our next lieutenant governor. I don't need to tell our viewers about the challenges we face in this moment. We are all witnessing history. Our current reality demands bold, transformational change, and I believe I'm uniquely positioned to deliver that change. Now, a lot of people don't know exactly what the lieutenant governor does, so I want to lay it out. The most important role is serving as our Senate president. As the only senator running and the only person with leadership experience as majority floor leader making change in the Senate, I'm uniquely qualified. And that's why our current Lieutenant Governor, Cyrus Habib, endorses me, calling me the most qualified for the role. But the role of Lieutenant Governor is more than just that. As number 2 in the executive branch, with the right kind of leader, this office could be a game changer for the bold transformation we need right now. And when you look at my work in the legislature over the last 12 years, I bring the progressive record and the relationships it will take to deliver this change. I've led efforts to close our last coal-fired power plant and pass the largest expansion of mass transit in state history through Sound Transit 3. That's bold climate action, and we need more of it. I helped negotiate the most progressive paid family and medical leave program in the nation, and I've taken on the big interests: Boeing, Microsoft, Amazon. That's what it'll take to create an economy that works for everyone. On a personal note, I banned conversion therapy. And I've also expanded college opportunities for undocumented students and dreamers, because in our state, we lift up the most vulnerable and we don't leave anyone behind. I was the first millennial elected to state office here, and I'd be our state's first openly gay state executive. I know what it means to break down barriers and lift people up. I've been endorsed by the Washington conservation voters and groups representing the neighbors at the front lines of this moment: teachers, grocery workers, nurses, and home caregivers, and 3/4 of my Senate Democratic colleagues are supporting me. I look forward to the discussion tonight, to sharing my vision, and to earning your support.
Very good, Mr. Liias. Thank you very much. Ms. Davison Sattler, 120 seconds for opening comments. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for taking some time out away from your family and friends or other hobbies you'd want to do, just taking some time to listen to us tonight. I do want to give a precursor. If you hear noise around me, it's because I have dogs and kids. I'm a mom, and we're in the trenches. We all are in our own unique way. I am a Seattle attorney, an arbitrator, a mediator, and a teacher. And I am someone who's new to politics because I was greatly dissatisfied with the response to problems on the ground in my town of Seattle. I've lived in Seattle for 25 years and moved here to work in the front office of the Seattle Supersonics. Not only have we lost our Sonics, which we need to bring back, but we have lost a political balance in our state. It is at risk. We must have a place where people in the middle are welcome. We need to make sure that we bring political balance, which means no shaming, no shunning, open political dialogue, a political diversity at our state level. We need to show that we are the bedrock of bipartisan work, not that we are the walk towards socialism. I want to see a lieutenant governor who brings that to the state. I also want to highlight fiscal responsibility. As Marko said, we are coming out of COVID-19. This is critical time to be tight with our budget, just like you would with your own family's budget. We need to make smart, strategic choices with those tax dollars that we are entrusted to, which we pay our hardworking dollars to our government to provide for those who are in need. It needs to make sure that those are only used for those reasons and not for anything wasteful or inefficient. I want to make sure that we are addressing issues that were pivotal for me even before we were in COVID-19: homelessness, public safety, addiction, and mental health. I know with my own 2 kids, they're going to be struggling with mental health issues. We all are, all of our neighbors and friends, as we come through this time where we've been home and isolated. It is going to be an extremely important issue. It is underfunded in our state, and we need to make sure that we are taking care of people so that we can have a new way of doing things. And that doesn't necessarily mean a walk to the far left. It means making room for everyone. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. In this first segment, we will be asking candidates questions that we've scripted for them and not having follow-up as a matter of course. To begin, I want to start with you, Ms. Davison Sattler. I should say we've worked on making sure these questions are as fair and even-handed as possible. That does not necessarily mean they'll be easy, but hopefully they'll be enlightening for us all. This week, ma'am, you announced your support for the abolition of the office of Lieutenant Governor. the office, of course, that you're seeking this election. You've noted that the legislature has the power to eliminate the office and its $3 million budget. Can you explain to voters why you're running for an office you want to eliminate? And if it's the job of the legislature to make budget cuts, why not run for the legislature?
I do want to thank you for that question. My proposal is a policy proposal of where can we find funds. It's not necessarily that I'm proposing that we need to not have it. It needs to say that where could those $3 million actually be best used? When we've been talking about who is essential as essential workers, we need to make sure we're looking at government. We have not cleaned out our political closet in a long time, and no doubt we have accumulated waste. And so we need to look at it with a scalpel. We need to make sure we are very strategic and that every dollar is actually being used for those who are most in need. Do we need someone in a ministerial position? Maybe we don't. Other states don't have it. We need to make sure that if it's necessary that we need to be able to have the budget dollars that we need. Instead of raising taxes, we need to be cutting. And this is one that I'm saying, if you need these dollars, absolutely take them. I'm not doing this for political gain. I'm not doing this to make sure I'm reelected. I'm making sure that we have political balance and fiscal responsibility for the Washington state. And we need to make sure that everyone is willing to do their part. I'm showing I'm willing to win and sacrifice it if that's what we need to have those dollars available for Washingtonians. I don't need to be pomp and circumstance. I don't need to go on junket trips. I happily will serve and represent all across our state, energizing trade, bringing a voice to people who are unheard around our state. But I'm saying I am willing to forego that because every dollar will count as we exit this COVID-19 crisis. Every single dollar, it will buy 6,000 days of rehab, over 88,000 of school lunches. These are things that people need. And I think that it's important that we have people elected to office who are not there for their own self-serving reasons, but it is for public service. And that's why I put that forward.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Liias, you've served in the state Senate since 2014. During that time, you've had two very different individuals who held the position of Lieutenant Governor, Brad Owen and Cyrus Habib. Both of them put their own stamp based on their own interests and image on the office of Lieutenant Governor. So if you are elected, how would you reshape the office of Lieutenant Governor to better reflect your interests?
Well, thanks for that question. I think the Lieutenant Governor, as I shared in my introduction, really is poised to be a game changer in the transformation we need in our state. I would use my position as the chair of the Senate Rules Committee and as the president of the Senate to work with my Senate Democratic colleagues to really bring forward critical legislation to build the economy from the middle out. That means really focusing on supporting our small and medium-sized businesses, focusing on that green transition that we need to reduce our carbon emissions and begin to address global warming. I also want to be a champion for universal health care for everyone. We know in this moment with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people unemployed and losing their health insurance that our current model isn't working for Washingtonians. And the final priority is one that's been important my whole life, which is making sure that education and opportunity are available to all. As president of the Senate, as chair of the Senate Rules Committee, with what Teddy Roosevelt called the bully pulpit of this office, I will make sure we're championing these critical investments, these transformational changes for our state.
Very good. Thank you. You guys are pithy and under our time limit. I love it. Third question goes back to you, Mr. Liias. As a legislator, you've supported policies like a low carbon fuel standard to address climate change. During your time, you've also supported things like capital gains tax to address the regressivity of our fiscal and tax code in Washington state. When you first joined the legislature, it was in 2008. And since that time, Democrats have held the majority for most of that time, all of that time in the House and most of that time in the Senate. Why have you and your Democratic colleagues not made more progress on climate change and addressing the regressivity of the tax code during your time in office?
I think the challenge we face right now is the need to really make progress moving forward. And when we took office as the new Senate Democratic majority in 2018, we quickly set to work passing more climate change and carbon reduction bills in the last 3 years than it had passed at any point before in state history. We've tackled things like setting a goal of 100% clean energy by 2045. We tackled emissions in our built environment by passing the toughest building efficiency standards in the country and by addressing appliance efficiency standards as well. We've got to build on that. And what I love about the Clean Fuel Standard is it helps us build that circular economy here in our state. Farmers in the eastern part of our state will grow our feed crops. The biorefinery in Grace Harbor will refine that into biofuels for people all over the state, including in our urban areas, to use as we travel around Washington all the time, at each step, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, putting people to work, and addressing this existential threat to human habitation on our planet. We also know our tax system is broken. We have the most upside down tax system in the country. If you're a working family, the family at the bottom of our economy, for every $100 you earn, you have to pay $10 in taxes to state and local government. If you're Bill Gates, you pay $1 for that same $100 you earn in our state. We've got to turn that upside down. And part of that is by passing a capital gains excise tax on the wealthiest Washingtonians, the 40,000 Washingtonians who aren't contributing their fair share, asking them to chip in to help fund education, healthcare, critical services to keep our economy afloat, help us grow out of this COVID moment, and help us build the economy. We are on the verge of that change. I'm so excited at all the amazing new candidates running, the new energy we've seen in 2018, and again this year in 2020. We are electing a whole new crop of Democrats that are going to make a big difference, make these transformational changes, and push our state into the future.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Davison Sattler, you said in an interview with reporter Michael Goldberg at our site, The Wire, that you are running first and foremost to bring political balance to Olympia. You've said that again here in your opening comments tonight. While you are running as a Republican in this race, it was just a few months ago, 8 months ago, that you ran for the Seattle City Council as a Democrat. So as a new Republican, why are you the right candidate to bring political balance to Olympia rather than other candidates who've been members of the Republican Party for much longer?
Again, I personally appreciate the opportunity to answer this question. The Seattle City Council is a nonpartisan race. And I never made a claim of who I was until I was accused of being Republican, because I was requiring there to be measurable outcomes for those tax dollars. And the policies I supported, and I said that we were in dire need of, I was then labeled. And that is why I've said the Democrats have gone so far left that they have left me. And really, that is what I need to say. I am the one to support, because we see what is happening. There is a march towards a socialist perspective, and it comes from within the city of Seattle. It is coming to Olympia on their policy pipeline. We need to make sure that we have a place where people, again, do not feel shamed. They use that. They called me a closet Republican. And can you imagine in 2020 to use the term closet before any word? That is a sure sign of intolerance. And this is not from the voters. These are from inside power holders. And I saw that this was really unconscionable. Leaving people homeless along the roadways, where I worked in a refugee camp on the border of Cambodia, where people were fleeing civil war, and those conditions were more humane, more compassionate, and more hygienic than we've left people to deteriorate and fend for themselves along the roadways of Seattle. And we had not seen even a state response. We had called an emergency in the city and the county, but there was nothing done. So I say, yes, I am running as Republican, because I see that we need to have better balance. We need, again, to have political diversity. If we have one party ruling for so long, we become out of balance. It's as if you're using one side of your body only. We need to use both sides. And that's where we function best as a society. And we have welcoming places for everyone to express their opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to turn now to a couple of questions that we received from our readers. These will be questions that I'll pose to one of you directly, but allow the other candidate to follow up with comments. You'll have 120 seconds to respond to the question directly, and the second candidate will have 60 seconds in follow-up. We're going to remain with you, Ms. Davison Sattler. When we asked readers to submit questions, one that came up often was one like that which comes from Amanda Fisher. Amanda is a human resources specialist at the South Whidbey School District, and Amanda asks simply, do you support the Black Lives Matter movement? And what steps would you take to dismantle systemic racism with your unique role as lieutenant governor if you win this election? So you'll have 2 minutes to respond.
Absolutely, we do say Black Lives Matter. The movement is separate from the message. And I want to make sure that that is clear. I support that message. I've heard friends, colleagues, and neighbors express that they don't feel safe when I've had the advantage of feeling safe. So I walked with a group of lawyers saying, yes, we hear you, and we want to acknowledge that it is time that your story is at the forefront. I do separate that from the organization, but the message is what I believe in. We need to make sure that people feel safe. Public safety is about everyone feeling safe and getting that for them. We do have to combat things that are built into our system. And it does start with us all acknowledging that. I would be the first female lieutenant governor in a history of our state. We need to make sure that we see these things, we talk about them, but then we also focus on our commonalities. I think, again, humanizing someone that you actually think you despise, humanizing them because they actually have commonalities with you. So as we talk about Black Lives Matter, we also talk about that public safety is for everyone. And if we are going to make sure that they feel safe as well, we open the circle, we widen the table, and we make sure that voices are heard and no one is shamed and no one is shunned. And that is really, I think, what we can do. That's why I talk about political balance. I think that's why we see the urban and rural divide. I think that's why we see racial division, is because it is focused on. We need to highlight it and we need to make space and listen when we're not part of that group. But then we need to come together and we need to unite. And that is by saying we are humans. We do have commonalities. We do need to solve problems together. And that's how we better our society. I want to model the behavior for my kids. I want them to see we solve problems with people who have differing views than we have of our own. And we do that where we uphold people who need to say, my voice has not been heard, and we hear you.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Liias, would you like to respond for 60 seconds?
Well, absolutely. And I agree with Ann. We have to say it often and loudly. Black Lives Matter in our state. We also have to say their names. Charlene Lyles, Manny Ellis, so many others have been lost to violence in our own state. And it is time that we reform policing here. I was proud to bring Initiative 940 to the Senate floor for a vote. I'm sad to say that it didn't save Manny Ellis from that tragic fate that he met. We have to do more. We have to demilitarize our police. We need better accountability, body cameras, independent review of police use of force. We also have to tackle the policies of mass incarceration in our state. Today, right now in Washington, over 137,000 people are in prison, in jail, or under supervision in our community. That's more than the population of Everett or the population of Spokane Valley, an entire large city that's confined right now in our state. We have to dismantle that system and really focus on strategies that improve public safety and that help Black and Brown and Indigenous lives lead lives of productive safety and respect in our state.
Very good. Thank you. This next question will remain with you, Mr. Liias. It comes from another reader, Stan Sorsher, who serves as the president of the Washington Free Trade Coalition. And his question is this: the duties of the lieutenant governor include responsibility for trade policy. Washington State's dependence on trade makes us very sensitive to getting trade policy correct and recognizing when our trade policy is not correct. Millions of voters have concluded that the harm from our trade policy outweighs the gains. What changes would you make to restore the trust in the way Washingtonians perceive globalization and how we manage trade in the state? You'll have 120 seconds.
Well, I appreciate Stan's leadership of the SPIA union that represents thousands of my constituents here in South Snohomish County, the Boeing engineers and technicians. This is a really important question for our state. We have more jobs linked to trade in Washington than any other state in the union. It is really critical that we develop these international relationships. I think what is clear is that the Trump administration's tariff policies have led to measurable harm for our state, harm for the agricultural sector, harm for our aviation manufacturing sector, harm for people in every community around Washington. We need to end that policy and move to a free trade system that is focused on fair trade, where we have strong labor and environmental standards, as well as healthy relationships with our trading partners. As Lieutenant Governor, my role would be simple in that, to lead trade missions to countries around the world, to make sure that they know we're open for business and to help our businesses forge connections there. I was proud to join Lieutenant Governor Habib on missions to South Korea, to Spain, and to the Paris Air Show. And when we went to Paris, we didn't take Boeing with us as part of our delegation. We took small and medium-sized aerospace companies, many from my district in South Snohomish County, to make sure that they had access to international marketplaces and relationships so that we could grow our economy from the middle out. We don't need more assistance for big companies. It's our small and medium-sized businesses that need access to those opportunities. They also need trade policies that will lift them up. Those are the kind of things that I will advocate for as our next Lieutenant Governor.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Ms. Davison Sattler, would you like 60 seconds to follow up?
Yes, I would. Thank you. As a lawyer, I did study international law, and so this is an important part for me. Trade is really significant for our state, particularly with our agriculture. I'm proud to be endorsed by the Washington State Farm Bureau. It is important to make sure that our agriculture trade gets to our ports and that we have access to that, that we open up our markets again, that we see that we can help re-energize our economy by using trade. I think we also need to make sure that we are very careful in how we spend those dollars. Sometimes you need to go overseas, but sometimes you really don't. We see that we can conduct business in this kind of type of a forum. I think every tax dollar needs to be saved when we are talking about trade as well. There are ways to build relationships, even cross-border. There are ways to do transactions that we can actually better our small business access to trade that they are prevented from doing because they don't have the resources within. And I think the Lieutenant Governor's office needs to continue to do that. It needs to go back to doing that. It has started to do less. It used to serve over 800 cases a quarter. Now it's under 200. We need to go back to serving business.
Thank you. Very good. Ms. Davison Sattler, we'll stick with you for this next question. As you know, the Lieutenant Governor of Washington is the president of the Senate, acting in a ministerial duty there, and also serves as the acting governor in the absence of the governor in the state. If elected, of course, you would be the first in line of succession to the governorship. Some folks believe that Jay Inslee may well be in line for a federal cabinet position should Joe Biden win the presidency, and that there may be a vacancy in the governorship to which the lieutenant governor would accede. So you're running for lieutenant governor, but you may very well be governor before too long if you win. Why are you the best qualified candidate to serve as governor?
I do want to start out that I did run for lieutenant governor before we knew that the current office holder was not going to seek re-election. Again, because I think we need to see an example of political balance. Again, that's why I highlight this position for that, presiding over the Senate, where you do have to act in a nonpartisan way, where you need to show that you can mediate between two houses. I think that is precisely why I would be best to serve as governor. We need to say that we can have agreement across party lines, again, across urban, rural. People want to see us come together and solve problems. I have worked with egos in professional sports. I have worked with refugees. I have taught international students. I have a wide range of people that I've worked with, and each one is important. We need to show that everyone has something to contribute. And that means that even if you've not been elected to office before, you actually can lead. I have done that. I have done that in every part of my life. It is significant to note that when we are looking for someone as a leader, we are looking for someone who is not seeking glory or fame or ego strokes. It is to lead, because in difficult times like this, we need someone willing to take decisive action. And sometimes we don't see that. And sometimes we need boldness, but we need it with compassion. Every time with the humanity that we have in leadership, bringing people together, focusing on the problem, not the divisiveness. And I think that's what we really, most everyday people are longing for.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Liias, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, I'm running for this office to be our next lieutenant governor. I'm excited to build on my work in the Senate as president of the Senate, but it is a possibility at any time that the lieutenant governor may have to step in, and I do believe I'm qualified in that case. For the last 12 years, I've served in the legislature, building strong relationships, serving on committees that oversee every area of state policy. I've worked on our budget committee as well as our transportation budget committee, so I understand the details of state government. As majority floor leader, I schedule all of the governor's cabinet appointees for their confirmation vote and have used that opportunity to get to know Governor Inslee's team and to meet them personally. So I feel like I have the relationships, the qualifications, but more than that, I think it's time for a generational transition in our state. It's the other reason I'm running, is to make sure that we have the next generation in charge as we're making some of these really critical decisions that shape the future of Washington. I'd be our first millennial. I also would be our state's first openly LGBTQ state executive when I'm elected. And that's, I think, really important for voters to consider as well.
Thank you. Mr. Liias, we'll stick with you for a moment. As you know, many of your Democratic colleagues in the legislature support enacting progressive tax reforms to address specifically the public health and economic consequences of this pandemic. Seattle just passed a corporate payroll tax, and some in the business community there are worried that larger businesses in particular will leave the city of Seattle. Should a statewide or a regional progressive tax measure pass in Olympia, how can folks invested in our state, either as citizens and workers or as business owners, how can the state ensure and individuals ensure that major employers will remain in Washington state if those progressive tax measures were to pass?
Well, I will take you back to my comments a few minutes ago. We have the most upside down tax system in the country. That is, those at the bottom, those that are striving to join the middle class, those are working families, pay a disproportionately high share of their income to state and local taxes. It's our largest businesses and our wealthiest Washingtonians that pay very little. And so I think as we shift to a system that's fair, where we ask all of our Washingtonians to contribute in similar ways to the critical public services we all use, that's going to keep us in a competitive position. When I talked about that capital gains excise tax a few minutes ago, over 40 states have that at the state level. So there would be nothing uncompetitive about us moving in line with the other 40 states. I think as we look at other taxes on business, on high earners, we want to make sure we remain competitive so we aren't shifting jobs to other states. But with the most upside down, the most broken tax code in the country, we have a lot of room for improvement and a lot of ways that we can bring necessary revenue to the state budget without impacting working families and keeping our state competitive.
Very good. Ms. Davison Sattler, would you like to follow up for 60 seconds?
Yes, thank you. I agree with Marko. We do have a lot of room for improvement, and that means cutting spending. We have a lot of wastefulness going on in Olympia, and we need to make sure we tighten our belt. It is really critical for businesses to remain in Washington State, and I do think it will start to see. I've heard it from tech friends. They're saying we can work from anywhere. Why would we need to subject our workers to stay here? We've seen people relocate to Texas, where I grew up. This is happening, and it's happening because of the additional tax that keeps putting on more and more and more. And it's a walk towards an income tax, right? This is what is happening. And I don't really think that we should trust people with more of our hard-earned tax dollars when they can't even spend what they already have in a wise, frugal way. We need to bring back frugality and resourcefulness, and that starts with the government budget. We have got to start cutting spending and taking care of Washingtonians, and that means having businesses stay and want to grow and thrive here.
Very good. Thank you. In this next segment, we will allow each candidate to ask one another a question. They'll get 30 seconds to ask their question because sometimes these questions can be a little bit longer than a direct question. So you'll have 30 seconds, candidates, and then when you respond, you'll have a full 120 seconds to answer that question. We'll start with you first, Ms. Davison Sattler. Do you have a question that you'd like to ask Mr. Liias?
Yes, and I must say, I really love this idea. So thank you for letting us do this type of format. Marko, I really do want to ask you, and I would like to have it more as a conversation, because when you have the word debate, it starts to feel aggressive, and I like to just have a conversation. But I do have, I already have a yellow card. Oh no, I do have concern. You have expressed that you were handpicked by the current office holder to run for this seat. And so you did know that he was leaving. He has been publicly admonished by his predecessor for his hyper-partisan campaigning. How would you not do that when you've said you want to use the seat to move the needle towards the progressive vote? How would you actually do it in a nonpartisan way?
Mr. Liias, you want to respond?
Ann, I appreciate the question, and I'm proud to have the support of my friend Cyrus Habib. I think he's done an incredible job as our lieutenant governor these last 4 years. I would govern as lieutenant governor the same way that I have as our majority floor leader, which is we have created ample room for a vigorous and robust debate in the Senate on important issues facing the future of Washington, and then we bring those issues to a vote. That's the way I believe that our democracy works. It doesn't mean that we don't discuss rigorously and honestly and openly, discussing amendments, discussing ways that we could make proposals better, but eventually we've got to bring it to a vote. That's the way that I would lead as our lieutenant governor. I think we've seen in Congress inaction, we've seen them just sort of fiddling while big challenges continue to lie unaddressed. And I think it's really important here at the state level that we continue to make bold, transformational change, continue to make progress in a way that welcomes all perspectives, welcomes all voices, but then leads to an outcome and leads to a decision. That's what I've done as majority floor leader. That's what I would do as our next lieutenant governor.
Very good. Thank you. And Mr. Liias, would you like to pose a question to Ms. Davison Sattler?
Yeah, absolutely. And in 2019, I brought legislation to the Senate floor to ensure that Washingtonians couldn't be denied health insurance because of pre-existing conditions. Right now, the Trump administration is suing in federal court to overturn those protections for all Americans. And I wondered if you agree with President Trump's lawsuit to end protections for pre-existing conditions, and if not, what you can do to help change his mind.
Ms. Davison Sattler, you want to jump in for 120
yes,
seconds?
Yes, sorry, I forgot that I need to unmute. Look, people get sick. I had a melanoma. We have got people with pre-existing conditions, and we need to make sure that we are providing care for people. It is a critical piece of living, and we need to make sure that we do not eliminate that.
Very good. We're going to offer you both an opportunity to pose a question to Mr. Heck. He was, of course, invited. We want to make sure that that we offer you the same opportunity we've offered you now to one another, that you can pose a question to Mr. Heck. The important difference in this case is the question that you pose to him, we will allow him to respond if he chooses by writing, and we can post that at the Washington State Wire. We'll also ask you to answer your own question, not on behalf of the Heck campaign, but of course on behalf of yourself. So let me start with you, Ms. Davison Sattler. Do you have a question that you'd like to ask Mr. Heck were he to be here, and how would you respond to that question yourself?
Yes, thank you again for the opportunity. Yes, I would ask. He has said on national television that he didn't think the Chaz, then changed to the term CHOP, was really a big problem. He didn't see that there was any big issue with that. And as we've seen, unfortunately, 2 people were killed during that time period here in my town of Seattle. And I wondered if he changed his position on that, seeing as how things have come about.
And what are your thoughts on the Capitol Hill organized protest area, and we'll extend that to the way the Seattle police responded to the riots, or the protests rather, in Seattle? What are your thoughts?
I used to live a few blocks from there right out of law school, and I didn't have a car, and I ran everywhere around the city. So it was really greatly sad that we had to see it come to that, right? That the message of Black Lives Matter had to actually resort to this type of a message to get it across. So that's first and foremost, that we want to make sure that that message is clear, and that ability to say that in a peaceful way is always welcomed. And so I think that was first. But I do, again, as a lawyer, we have rules and we have laws so that we can all live in close proximity of one another. And those laws have to be enforced so that I don't harm you and you don't harm me. And it really is that simple. That's what my kids, I want that modeled for my children and their generation, that we have laws and they are meaningful. And so we need to uphold them. And so that is the difficulty there, is where there was laws that were not being enforced, they were not being prosecuted, and charges were not being brought. We need to have civility and order for us all to care for our families and do our work. People are better when we have a sense of purpose. We have people not with a sense of purpose right now in COVID-19, a lot of people out of work, a lot of people isolated. And I think that fed into this. And so I want to see that we are bringing people together again. And I think that it was a sad situation that we saw.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Liias, would you have a question that you would like to pose to Mr. Heck were he to be here, and how would you answer that on behalf of yourself?
Yeah, my question is, in the last round of PPP funding, businesses that Denny has directly invested in, and several who have donated to his campaign received funds. Banks that have contributed huge sums to his campaigns for Congress are raking in billions in processing fees, and wealthy companies have taken billions without disclosure. Meanwhile, thousands of Washington businesses are still waiting for help. So I would want to ask him if he thinks members of Congress should be prohibited from receiving rescue funds, that fees should be capped, and that there should be full disclosure of any funds that come from these programs.
And if you can answer that, of course, I can guess where your opinion may go, but address the question you posed, but also ask about the appropriate role of elected officials and campaign finance contributions, in your view, when those public officials are helping constituents, and how that may turn around to lead to campaign contributions. So answer your question directly about the PPP, but also about campaign finance in general, if you would.
Yeah, I think what is clear is that the federal government response has not been even-handed, and there are thousands of businesses in Washington that are still waiting for assistance, and we've got undocumented businesses that, because of really divisive and hateful restrictions in the stimulus bill, didn't receive any assistance. So I think we definitely need action from Congress. We also have heard from thousands of folks who are trying to find money to pay their rent. So we need support for homeowners and renters and others as well. So I think we need a more even-handed response. When it comes to elected officials themselves, we need clear, bright lines of transparency and accountability. In the Senate, we have a process where if any member of the Senate has any interest in any bill before us, we disclose that publicly on the floor of the Senate and ask the lieutenant governor for a ruling on whether we should be precluded from voting on that issue. I think when it comes to issues as important as rescue funds, as these loans to businesses, we need to be crystal clear about any conflicts of interest we have. And that's what I would have wanted to hear clearly from Congressman Heck tonight.
Very good. I will say it is not every day you get two well-regarded, well-respected, and well-reformed candidates come in under time. But you have done that, which I'm going to call a little bit of an audible and pose a few questions to you in our remaining time that we have of a few minutes. Pose a few questions that we've gotten from participants in this evening's event. So as you know, both Ann and Marko, we've been taking questions from our online forum. Folks watching this on, excuse me, on TVW won't be able to see that, but I want to be able to pose a few of these. And while the lieutenant governor's role is a little more prescripted, of course, it has a large informal role, as we've discussed, and also can possibly accede to the governorship. So some of these are not traditional lieutenant governor questions, but I want to pose them anyway. Joe Kunzler asks, and I'll give both of you 60 seconds to respond to this. What are your thoughts on public transit and how we can fund it both at the state level and regionally? The state provides critical aid to our county level transit system, some of which are in crisis right now. So as lieutenant governor, will you commit to protect and grow mobility grants, or speak to how you would look to fund community, regional, and state transportation projects, both transit and otherwise? And Ms. Davison Sattler, let me give you 60 seconds to begin.
I'm glad that Joe got his question in. I am short-winded because I just came from a Republican debate right before this. So I am short-winded. So I've been going at this since 5:30. Look, transit is important. Like I said, I used to not have a car when I lived here as a single woman. We have to be able to have access for people, and that's regionally, and that is within urban settings and within rural settings. Again, I look for funding. I'm about cutting spending. I do think we have got wasteful spending. We have inefficiencies. We have money that is tied to a target that is not actually even being measured. We have our Department of Commerce, for example, has graphs that actually shows us what their targets are, but year after year, they don't actually meet the target, but the budget continues to be approved. So we have dollars that are being put someplace that are not actually going to measurable outcomes. That's money we can take back in and we can put it to transit, because transit is important. We need to be green, we need to look green, and we need to make sure that we are doing that within our fuel systems, and we have transit available for people, because we need to be making sure that we have that. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Liias, do you want to jump in on this question for 60 seconds?
Yeah, absolutely. I was proud in the last transportation package to double state funding for public transit, as well as to be the prime sponsor of what became Sound Transit 3, the largest expansion of mass transit in state history. Transit plays a critical role in reducing our state's greenhouse gas emissions, but also creating more livable communities. In the last recession in Snohomish County, we lost Sunday transit service. And we heard loud and clear from our business community that we were uncompetitive as a region without basic levels of public transit. As we're trying to attract world-class talent from places that have much better transit systems than we do, it really put us at a competitive disadvantage. And so I want to make sure in the next transportation package, which is being discussed right now, that we make substantial increases. I also would like to see us speed up the delivery of light rail. So folks in my community in Everett that are scheduled to wait until 2036 until light rail arrives could get that faster. And I think that takes a state and federal partnership. As Lieutenant Governor, I'd be in a unique position to help bring people together to find those solutions and make progress.
Very good. Thank you. I'm going to try and get in a few more of these. So I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds to respond to this next one. This comes from Debbie Graham, and we've talked about police and protests a little bit, but she asked specifically to share your thoughts on whether you support defunding the police, the conversation taking place primarily in Seattle, but in other urban areas and of course in other cities in Washington state. Can you speak to the concerns of the moderate politically minded citizens when it comes to police reform? Mr. Liias, you want to jump in on this first for 30 seconds?
Yeah, I think when we look at the challenges that so many communities are facing on our streets, we've got homelessness and folks facing substance use disorder. The police are not the best response in those cases. We need more social workers, and we need a different type of response. So when I hear folks talking about defunding police, what I really hear them saying is we need to reprioritize that funding to actually solving the core problem, and I agree with that.
Ann, you want to jump in, Ms. Davison Sattler?
Absolutely. I'm the opposite of Marko. We've shown across Washington only 6% actually support defunding the police. The police, it not only provides great jobs for people, long-lasting jobs with pensions, but it also provides public safety. I think there is a way to make sure that they are part of the community. There are different ways of policing where people are part of the regular beat, where they actually know the people that they're there to protect. I think that we need to say thank you to those who choose to serve and protect us all. And we need to make sure that we keep their funding.
Thank you. One of the most contentious issues in the Senate, where you have served, Mr. Liias, and of course, which held up the capital budget a few years ago, is the issue of groundwater. And Chris Stearns asks about overpumping of groundwater, particularly for alfalfa farms in places like Arizona, but that even in Washington state, our groundwater is at risk of being depleted. So, Mr. Liias, to you first, what can we do to protect our own groundwater supply, Chris asks, since we have a rapidly growing population? In 30 seconds, how would you address the issue of navigating very sometimes contentious groundwater and well issues in our state?
Well, I was proud to be part of the team that negotiated a resolution to the Hearst decision right after we retook the majority. And the solution we came up with, I think, is a solution that will work, which is watershed by watershed to bring stakeholders together to address this issue. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for all of Washington. We need to address the unique challenges in Yakima and the Skagit, in other parts of the state. And that means bringing tribes, conservationists, it means bringing real estate developers and bringing folks who are advocates for agriculture to the table together to find those local solutions. That's what we did there, and I support that.
Very good. Ms. Davison Sattler, do you want to jump in on the topic of groundwater and well water?
Yeah. My understanding of water rights is that we basically are from the Wild West, right, of what happened long ago. And it's really time that we revamp some of that. We need to streamline that process and talk about people who have ownership of those water rights and where we can make those improvements. Some people have too much, some people have not enough. And there's a way to work together to make sure that we are getting the agricultural needs that we have so that we can, again, reinvigorate our economy and our agricultural base out in the East.
Very good. Jacqueline Nishino asks about your support and in what ways would you work to expand transgender rights, and also notes the importance of health education for transgender citizens and students in our K-12 system. There's a big conversation, or will be a conversation at the ballot box about sex education in Washington state. Ms. Davison Sattler, let me ask you first for a quick 30 seconds on transgender rights and education in K-12 schools.
Well, this does affect me because I do have young elementary age kids. Everyone is important, and that's first and foremost. But I do think that something of that nature, when it talks about education with sexual health education, I do want to do that as a parent. I do think that's not something that our state government should be talking about. That's something that families units should be doing, whatever they look like, whatever the family unit looks like. When we have gaps, we need to make sure that we have adequate schooling for kids and access to counselors for that.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Liias?
Well, DJ, I think we have to be honest that our state is not yet a safe place for transgender Washingtonians. Last year, we lost Nikki Kuhnhausen in a tragic and heinous act of violence because of her identity. We have to do more to make sure that our whole society is safe. I was proud last year to lead the effort to pass a transgender student policy for all of our public schools to ensure that in every school in Washington, trans students are treated with respect and dignity, that their privacy is protected, and that they have a safe and welcoming learning environment. I will continue that work as Lieutenant Governor and in whatever post the people give me to work on. Very
good. I want to ask one more question before we move to your closing comments. And this is my question, and I'll ask this because I feel like we all should be having this conversation in different ways during this time. But Mr. Liias, let me ask you first, this is a personal question, but how have you been doing in this COVID-19 pandemic personally? And how has your mental health been? My mental health depends on the minute sometimes and the hour. So I ask this with compassion and with love for you both. I wonder if you can just share how you have sort of endeavored through this rough last few months.
Well, it has been a really unprecedented time for me and for everybody in our state. I think for me, the hardest was April and May when it wasn't clear kind of where things were headed. I'm blessed to live near family, so we could have socially distant opportunities to see one another. And I live in a neighborhood with a lot of great sidewalks, so I could get out for a walk and get out there and connect with folks. Thanks to Zoom, I've had the chance to see friends from around the state and around the country. I've also had a chance to Zoom converse with members of my healthcare team when I needed it. So I think I feel pretty lucky. I know there's a lot of Washingtonians that don't have a healthcare team, that don't have access to the internet, that are facing a lot bigger challenges than me. I have a loved one that has to go to work and can't work from home. So my heart's been with them. As far as I'm concerned, I feel like I've had a pretty good go of it. And I look forward to a day when we can all gather together in the same room once again to have these conversations and really reconnect as Washingtonians and as neighbors.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for the forthrightness and authenticity. Ms. Davison Sattler, I'll ask you, how are you doing through this pandemic period? How has your mental health been? Again, saying this is somebody like us all who is, having to deal with things that they didn't know we were going to have to be dealing with a few months ago. How's it been going?
I must say your kind question has brought me to tears, because this is how we must connect with people right now, whether you know them or you don't know them. And really, I don't actually get a lot of time to check in with myself as a mom. I'm really focused on the mental health of my two young kids, because this is extremely difficult for them to process that they can't actually play with their friends. It's even hard for my dogs. They don't understand why they can't go and visit the dog when we're out on a walk, why they can't go sniff the other dog, because I need to stay away from that dog owner. So I use exercise a lot. That's a great outlet for me. I CrossFit. I don't get to do jujitsu anymore. You can't be next to someone wrestling in this, but you can do at-home workouts. So that's been one thing for me. But I'm glad that the schooling is over. That was a very rigorous, going through the trenches of remote learning. I agree with Marko that I know that I had access to devices and to broadband. And so I was able to do those things for my children, but navigating it was very difficult as a mom on top of the other things you're doing. So we are asking families to both, if you have a child or do you have a job, but it's really difficult to have both in this economy. And then mental health seems to be last on the list for a mom. I'll be eating the dinner I made at noon when we get done with this. So that's really kind of the day-to-day things. Well, thank you for that question.
Yeah, and thank you to you both for answering that and sharing some of your personal self with us on this this conversation. So let's get back to business. We got 2 minutes for each of you for our closing comments. And Ms. Davison Sattler, you went second for our opening comments, so you'll go first now as we conclude this evening. 120 seconds to you, ma'am.
And I may not use all of it. I do want to thank everyone for spending their time listening to us. Again, looking at a screen. We do long for the days, like Marko said, when we can be in a room together and shake hands. It is really difficult to continue to look at a screen. But I'm here before you because I am becoming civically engaged, and everyone who's listening needs to do so as well. If we do not speak up, if we do not stand up and say, we need to see examples of what we want for our children and their generation. I want to see people coming together to solve problems. I don't want to see any name calling. I don't want to see any shaming. I don't want to see any of it. I want to talk about behavior that is not socially acceptable, as in breaking the law, and behavior that is welcome, which is being kind to someone. I want that in our elected leadership. And I think that it's lacking at a lot of levels. And I need to see it. I need them to see it, especially as we exit COVID-19. I am proud to be endorsed by the Republican leaders, Senator Schuessler and Representative Wilcox. They have welcomed me warmly into the big tent of the Republican Party within Washington State as a newcomer, as someone who can change the face of that party, but really more so that someone who can speak to the needs of people who feel disenfranchised and unrepresented and stuck in the middle, and where should they go? And so I am really honored to have their endorsement. I'm also, like I said, endorsed by the Farm Bureau of Washington State, King County GOP, the concerned taxpayers of Washington State, and mainstream Republicans. But really, even beyond that, again, it is speaking up for families. I think we have a lot of parents who normally don't work out of the home and they stay home. Those are difficult days. I've lived through those as well as working full time as an attorney. They are difficult. And it is time to move forward the conversation of parents who do stay home, who choose to take care of young children. They do have social value. They do contribute. They just don't have a union speaking for them, and they don't get a paycheck. And now here, a lot of us have been doing that in the midst of COVID-19. I really would appreciate your vote. You can find out more at neighborsforann.com. It's ANN, no E. Thank you and good night.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Davison Sattler. Appreciate it. And Mr. Liias, you get the closing word, sir.
Well, thanks, DJ. I'm Marko Liias. As I shared at the beginning, I'm a lifelong Washingtonian, state senator, and college professor. I'm running to be our next lieutenant governor. The reason I'm running is simple. This is my home, and I owe everything I am to the opportunities I've had here. But not everyone gets the opportunities I've had, and we have to change that. Throughout tonight's event, I've shared why I'm uniquely positioned to deliver progress. And the best way to judge what someone will do is by looking at what they've already done. As Senate Majority Floor Leader, I played a critical role in making change. Together, we've passed the most progressive paid family and medical leave program in the country. We've expanded voting rights and protected women's reproductive freedom. We took action to address exploding prescription drug prices, including insulin. We fully funded our public schools and expanded financial aid to hundreds of thousands of Washingtonians, including our undocumented students and dreamers. As our next lieutenant governor, I'll roll up my sleeves and get to work, building an economy that works for everyone, white, black, and brown, and ensuring healthcare is universal, and committing to education for all. And in everything we do, we must ensure that social justice and equity are front and center. I'm so proud to have the support of Lieutenant Governor Cyrus Habib, 3/4 of Senate Democrats, as well as groups representing teachers, nurses, and home care workers. I've also been endorsed by Washington conservation voters and the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. But the most important support is from the voters. Elections are won one vote at a time. I'm Marko Liias, and I'd be honored to have your support.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Mr. Marko Liias, Democrat, Senator from the 21st District running for the Lieutenant Governor position. Ms. Ann Davison Sattler, attorney from Seattle running as a Republican for Lieutenant Governor. Appreciate both of you being with us. And to you in the chat room with us tonight, chiming in with questions. That was great stuff. I appreciate it. And for those of you who are watching this either at our site, the Washington State Wire, or at TVW, our media partner, thank you very much for tuning in. And best of luck as you roll into your ballot on August 4th to you, the voters, but also to you, the candidates. Thanks for your time. It's a public service that you're running, and we all appreciate it. Till then, we'll keep you informed about our next debate as we get closer to the general election. Till then, thanks very much for watching.
Thank you for joining us and for supporting the independent public service journalism provided at WashingtonStateWire.com.